The flames danced wildly, turning the small family-owned diner into a furnace. The neon sign that once proudly read Clara's Kitchen flickered twice before shattering into the street. Inside, Clara Dupree, just 35 and still clutching the life she had built from her inheritance, pounded on the locked back door, screaming for help. The air was thick, choking her lungs with smoke. Somewhere outside, sirens wailed, but too far away to matter. She could see him through the haze. Her husband, Darren, stood across the street, hands in his hoodie pockets, watching, not rushing in, not calling her name, just watching. For a second, their eyes met through the smoke, and then the faintest curl of a smile touched his lips. The wooden beams above Clara cracked. Sparks rained down like cruel fireworks. She realized in that final moment before the ceiling gave way that the man she trusted with her dreams and her heart was the one who had locked her in, and he wasn't here to save her. He was here to collect. Clara Dupree had always been the type of woman people rooted for. Born and raised in Lafayette, Louisiana, she was known for her warm smile, her gumbo recipe that could win competitions, and her refusal to let life's blows keep her down. When her mother passed, leaving her a modest inheritance, Clara knew exactly what she wanted to do: start the diner she'd been dreaming about since high school, a place where neighbors could eat good food, drink strong coffee, and linger long after the plates were cleared. The building she bought wasn't much. Peeling paint, cracked tiles, an ancient fryer that had seen better days. But Clara saw a charm in the bones of it. She worked day and night, scrubbing, painting, fixing, until Clara's kitchen opened its doors to the smell of biscuits baking and coffee brewing. That's where Darren came in. He was charming, in a way that made people forgive the rough edges. He had a carpenter's hands and a mechanic's swagger, quick to laugh, and even quicker to make someone feel special. They met when he came in to fix a faulty refrigerator in the diner's kitchen. He stayed for coffee, and by the time he left, Clara's number was in his pocket. At first, Darren was supportive. He helped with the renovations, stayed up late to patch the roof, and even suggested ways to expand the menu. Clara thought she had found someone who believed in her dream as much as she did, but the shine didn't last. As the months rolled on, Darren became restless. He complained about the long hours, the stress, and the constant stream of bills. Clara brushed it off, thinking it was just the adjustment to owning a business. But there were nights when he didn't come home, days when he was out working, but returned with no money in his wallet. Still, she clung to hope. She believed that marriage was about weathering storms, not running from them. And maybe, if the diner finally started turning a real profit, things would be better. The break came on a sweltering July afternoon. Clara had just received a small loan approval to renovate the diner's patio area. It felt like a fresh start. She told Darren over dinner, expecting him to share her excitement. Instead, he laughed. "Clara, why don't you just sell the place? You could make a killing, and we could start fresh somewhere else. Buy a house, maybe a boat. Who wants to spend their life frying eggs and pouring coffee?" The comment stung more than she admitted. This diner wasn't just a business. It was her mother's legacy, her own dream come to life. Selling wasn't an option. A week later, Darren came home with a manila envelope. He tossed it on the table and poured himself a beer. "It's an insurance policy," he said casually. "If something happens to the diner, we get a big payout. It's smart business, babe." Clara hesitated. "Something happens? Like what?" "Fires happen. Storms happen. Louisiana's unpredictable." He shrugged, sipping his drink. "It's just safety." Against her better judgment, Clara signed the papers. 2 months later, in the quiet hours before dawn, she woke to the smell of smoke. At first, she thought it was a dream. Then she heard the faint crackle of flames. She stumbled into the kitchen and froze. The wall near the pantry was ablaze, fire crawling up to it like it had been waiting for its chance. She ran to the back door, but it wouldn't budge. It was locked from the outside. Her heart pounded as she shouted for Darren. No answer. She banged on the door until her hands ached. The flames roared, closing in fast. Through the smoke and heat, she made out a shadow in the alley. Darren, just standing there. The air left her lungs, not from the smoke, but from the realization this was an accident, and Darren wasn't here to save her. The first officer on the scene, Deputy Mark Ellison, would later tell reporters that he had never smelled smoke that thick in his life. It clung to the air, coating his throat with ash before he even reached the diner's front door. By the time firefighters broke through the lockback entrance, the building was an inferno. They pulled Clara's body out near the kitchen's back wall, where she had collapsed. Her clothes were blackened with soot, her skin blistered from the heat. Paramedics tried, but there was nothing they could do. The onlookers who had gathered in their pajamas whispered to one another, some crying. Everyone in Lafayette knew Clara, and the sight of her lifeless body being wheeled into the ambulance was a gut punch to the entire community. Darren stood near the fire truck, his face buried in his hands. To the untrained eye, it looked like grief, but to Detective Sarah McConnell, it looked rehearsed. Sarah had been with the Lafayette Parish Sheriff's Department for 12 years. She'd seen the difference between a spouse crushed by sudden loss and one going through motions. Something about Darren's sobs seemed too controlled. The way his hands perfectly shielded his face from every camera angle. The way he peeked out every few seconds to see who was watching. The fire chief, a wiry man named Gus LeBlanc, pulled Sarah aside as crew sprayed the last of flames. "This fire didn't start on its own," he said in a low voice. "Accelerant everywhere. Smells like gasoline." Sarah's eyes swept the charred remains of the kitchen. A normal electrical fire would have crawled slowly, giving someone inside a chance to escape. This one had moved too fast, trapping Clara within minutes. Darren approached them, wiping his eyes. "Detective, I can't believe she's gone. She loved this place," he said, glancing over the wreckage. Sarah nodded slowly. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Dupree. Can you tell me where you were when the fire started?" "I was asleep at home," Darren replied quickly. "Woke up to a neighbor banging on my door, saying the diner was on fire. I ran straight here." "Anyone see you leave the house?" Sarah asked. Darren's jaw tightened. I don't know. It all happened so fast." Sarah's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer before she turned back to Gus. "Get me the full fire report," she murmured, "and check the back door for signs of tampering." Later that morning, Sarah walked the perimeter of the diner with her partner, Detective Luis Ortega. Luis pointed at the blackened remains of the back door. "Lock's busted, but from the outside. Someone wanted her trapped in there." They also found something else. Under a charred piece of siding, wedged between two bricks, was a red plastic gasket nozzle, the kind that screwed onto a portable gasoline container. Sarah bagged herself. "We'll run prints. If they come back to Darren, we got a problem." By midday, the coroner's report confirmed Clara had died from smoke inhalation, not burns, meaning she'd been alive when the fire surrounded her. The thought made Sarah's stomach twist. Louise flipped open a folder. "You're going to love this. The insurance policy was signed just 2 months ago. Coverage worth $350,000. Darren's the sole beneficiary." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Well, isn't that convenient? Still, they needed more. An insurance policy and a gut feeling weren't enough to put a man in prison for murder." That afternoon, Sarah paid Darren another visit, this time at his house. She noticed something strange before she even knocked. His pickup truck was parked in the driveway, and in the bed of it was a small, half-empty gas can. Darren opened the door, looking tired but cleaner than she expected. No soot-stained clothes. No smell of smoke. "We're still in the early stages of the investigation," Sarah said, her tone neutral. "But we found a few things at the scene I'd like to ask you about." Darren's eyes flickered. "Like what?" "Like a gas can nozzle near the back of the diner. Like the lock being damaged from the outside. Like the fact you just insured the place for more than triple what it's worth." He crossed his arms. "That doesn't mean anything. Lots of business owners get insurance." Sarah stepped a little closer, locking eyes with him. "And lots of business owners don't end up dead in their own kitchen 2 months later. You sure you don't want to tell me where you really were that night?" For a split second, his mouth opened, as if he was about to say something, but then he smiled faintly, leaned against the doorframe, and said, "You'll figure out, detective, or you won't." He closed the door in her face. That night, back at the station, Louise dropped a bombshell. Got a call from a neighbor. Said she saw Darren leave the house around 1:45 a.m., about 15 minutes before the fire was reported. Sarah leaned back in her chair, a slow grin spreading across her face. Well, Mr. Dupree, looks like you weren't sleeping after all. But the neighbor's statement wasn't enough. They needed hard evidence tying Darren to the fire, and that meant tracking down where he bought the gasoline and who saw him do it. The problem? The trail was already starting to go cold, and if Darren realized they were closing in, he might make sure no more evidence was left to find. The next morning, the smell of burn still hung in the air around what was left of Clara's kitchen. Detective Sarah McConnell stood on the sidewalk, staring at the blackened skeleton of the diner. It was more than just a crime scene now. It was a ticking clock. Every hour that passed meant the evidence Darren might have left behind was fading. Louise joined her, holding a paper cup of gas station coffee. I checked with the corner stores and gas stations within a 2-mile radius, he said. Problem is, only 2 of them have working security cameras, and one overwrites its footage every 48 hours. Sarah frowned. So we're in a race. They split up, Sarah heading to the first gas station, Louise to the second. At the Bayou fuel stop, the clerk was a tired man in his 50s named Roy who looked like he hadn't slept since the 90s. Sarah flashed her badge. I'm looking for footage from the early morning hours yesterday. Between 1 o'clock and 2 a.m., someone may have bought gasoline in a red plastic can. Roy scratched his beard. We get late-night fill-ups, sure, but I can't just hand over video without the managers say so. Sarah leaned forward, her voice low but firm. This isn't a parking dispute, sir. It's a homicide investigation. If that footage gets recorded over, you might be destroying evidence in a murder case. That got his attention. He led her into a small back office where a dusty computer screen showed grainy black and white camera feeds. She rewound the footage minute by minute until her heart gave a sharp jolt. There he was, Darren Dupree, hoodie pulled over his head, red gas can in hand. The timestamp read 1:32 a.m. He paid in cash, glanced toward the camera, and left. Sarah had what she needed, but when she looked again, she noticed something odd. Darren wasn't alone. In the passenger seat of his truck, there was a shadowy figure, too dark to make out clearly. Back at the station, Louise had worse news. The second gas station's footage had already been wiped. We've only got your copy, he said, setting the USB drive on her desk. But if there's someone else in that truck, we need to figure out who. They started digging into Darren's phone records. While he hadn't called anyone around the time of the fire, the tower data showed his phone pinging near Bayou fuel stop, right when the video was recorded, confirming he'd been there. But one name kept popping up in his recent history, Kevin Rourke. Louise tapped the file. 2 calls a day before the fire. 1 the week before. Rourke's a mechanic. Got a record for arson for hire back in 2009. Did 2 years in Angola before moving back here. Sarah's pulse quickened. If Rourke was in that truck, we're looking at conspiracy, not just murder. That evening, they brought Darren in for a follow-up interview. The trick with men like him was to make them feel like they were still in control, right until the moment they weren't. Sarah slid the printed still from the gas station footage across the table. That you? Darren glanced at it, then leaned back. Yeah, that's me. I buy gas all the time. You think I carry my car by hand. And the man in your passenger seat? She asked casually. His smile faltered for just a second. What man? Sarah didn't press. Not yet. Funny thing, Darren. Kevin Rourke's name keeps showing up in your phone logs. Now, he's a real interesting guy. Knows his way around engines and fires. He gave a short laugh, but it didn't reach his eyes. You're fishing, detective. Sarah stood, gathering her notes. Maybe, but sooner or later, even the best liars run out of bait. Outside the interview room, Luis was waiting. We got a problem, he said. I just got word Rourke's packing up his trailer. If he skips town, we lose him. Sarah grabbed her coat. Then we'd better move fast. By the time they reached Rourke's place, the driveway was empty. A neighbor said he'd seen Rourke leave less than an hour ago, hauling a small camper, headed east toward the state line. Sarah stared down the road. the night swallowing the taillights in her imagination. They were losing their second suspect. And without him, proving Darren had help and intent was going to be a whole lot harder. But something in her gut told her Rourke wasn't just running. He was hiding something. Something that could blow the case wide open. By dawn, every law enforcement agency between Lafayette and the Mississippi state line had been alerted to be on the lookout for a battered green Ford pickup hauling a white camper trailer. Kevin Rourke wasn't just a witness now. He was potentially the missing link between Darren and the fire that killed Clara Dupree. Detective Sarah McConnell sat in the passenger seat of the unmarked car, a map spread across her lap. Luis was behind the wheel, sipping his third. State troopers think they spotted him near Baton Rouge about 2 hours ago, Luis said. But by the time they got turned around, he was gone. Sarah traced the highway routes with her finger. If he's smart, he'll avoid the interstate. Country roads, back routes, less chance of getting stopped. Rourke doesn't strike me as a smart type, Luis muttered, turning onto a narrow stretch of road flanked by thick pine woods. They were halfway to St. Francisville when Sarah's phone rang. It was Trooper Barnes from the East Feliciana Parish Sheriff's Office. "Got something you want to hear," Barnes said. "One of my guys saw that camper parked behind an abandoned gas station off Highway 61. No one inside, but there's a duffel bag in the cab, and it's leaking gasoline." Sarah's pulse jumped. "Don't touch anything. We're on our way." When they arrived, the gas station looked like it had been dead for decades. Peeling paint, rusted pumps, weeds growing through cracked concrete. The camper sat behind the building, its back door hanging slightly open. Inside the truck's cab, they found the duffel bag. Luis crouched beside it, using gloves to unzip it. The smell hit them immediately, a strong, raw stench of gasoline. Inside were 3 empty red plastic gas cans, a roll of duct tape, and a bundle of rags. "Looks like someone's arson starter kit," Luis said grimly. Sarah scanned the tree line. "If Rourke left this here, he's nearby. He wouldn't just abandon his whole setup unless he had a reason." They swept the area, finding a trail of boot prints leading into the woods. About 50 yards in, they spotted a makeshift camp, a small fire pit, an empty beer can, and a sleeping bag. But no Rourke. The only clue was a half-burned piece of paper in the fire pit. Sarah used tongs to fish it out. The edges were charred, but enough remained to make out part of a sentence. "Me at the diner at 1:45 a.m. Make sure she's alone." Her stomach turned. This wasn't just a random act. Darren had planned it. Back at the station, they logged the evidence, but the case was still missing the most critical piece: Rourke himself. Without his testimony, they couldn't directly connect Darren to the planning. Worse, the DA made it clear: "I'm not going to trial on circumstantial evidence alone. Find Rourke, or we got nothing solid." That night, Sarah sat at her desk long after most of the department had gone home. She reread the neighbor's statement about Darren leaving the house that night, the gas station footage, the burn note. It was enough to make her believe Darren had orchestrated everything, but not enough to make a jury believe it beyond a reasonable doubt. Luis poked his head in. "You still here?" She nodded. "If we don't find Rourke soon, he's going to disappear for good, and Darren will walk away clean." Luis stepped inside, lowering his voice. "There's something else. We just got a tip from an informant in Baton Rouge. Says Rourke's looking for fake ID papers. Claims he's heading to Texas." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Then we've got one chance to catch him before he crosses the state line." She grabbed her jacket, determination setting in. "Let's set up a roadblock on every route west. If Rourke thinks he's running from us, he's about to find out we're already waiting." But when they finally stopped the green pickup the next afternoon, it wasn't Rourke behind the wheel. It was Darren, and in the passenger seat sat an empty holster with no sign of a gun. The moment Sarah saw Darren behind the wheel of Rourke's truck, her instinct screamed that the case had just shifted. Luis moved in with his weapon drawn, while Sarah yanked open the driver's door. "Step out, Darren," she ordered. He raised his hand slowly, wearing a smug half-smile. "Well, this is awkward. You're looking for my buddy, not me." "Where is he?" Sarah's voice was sharp. Darren shrugged. "Haven't seen him since yesterday. He said I could borrow the truck." Didn't tell me where he was going. I guess he's the one you should be talking to. Luis reached into the cab and pulled out the duffel bag they'd seen earlier at the abandoned gas station. Only this time, the gas cans were gone. Where are the cans? Luis demanded. Darren feigned confusion. What cans? Sarah didn't buy it. She noticed his jeans were dusted with ash, and there was a faint chemical smell clinging to his hoodie. Not as strong as pure gasoline, more like residue from something that had already burned. Back at the station, they booked Darren on obstruction charges. It wasn't the arson or murder they wanted, but it would keep him in holding while they dug deeper. During questioning, Darren stayed slippery. You're barking up the wrong tree, he said. I love my wife. Why would I hurt her? Sarah leaned forward. Because you were drowning in debt. Because the diner was insured for more than it was worth. And because your alibi fell apart when a neighbor saw you leaving at 1:45 a.m., the same time you and Rourke were caught on camera buying gas. Darren stared at her for a long moment, then smirked. You can't prove any of that without Rourke. And good luck finding him. 2 days later, luck finally came knocking. A park ranger in Kisatchie National Forest called to report a suspicious camper abandoned in the woods. When deputies approached it, they found Kevin Rourke, drunk, asleep, and with a loaded handgun on the floor beside him. Inside the camper were the missing gas cans, still reeking of fuel. There was also a small notebook tucked into the lining of his sleeping bag. Sarah flipped it open. Most of the pages were covered in messy handwriting. But on one page, dated 2 days before the fire, there was a chilling note. D. Says she locks up alone every night. Back door easiest. We split the payout when the check comes. Luis let out a low whistle. That's it. That's our link. When they brought Rourke into the interrogation room, he was belligerent at first, demanding a lawyer. But after a night in holding, a warm breakfast, and Sarah's quiet, steady pressure, he started to talk. He told me it'd be quick, Rourke muttered, eyes fixed on the table. Said she'd have time to get out. I didn't know he locked the door. Sarah kept her tone neutral. So Darren planned it? And you helped? Rourke nodded once. He promised me $50,000 from the insurance. Said it was just business. I swear I didn't think she'd die in there. His voice cracked, and for a moment, he looked less like a hardened arsonist and more like a man realizing he'd just confessed a felony murder. Sarah knew they finally had Darren. The gas station footage, the burned note from the campfire, the notebook, and now Rourke's statement. It all fit together. But there was one more thing Sarah needed to understand. She leaned closer to Rourke. Why now? Why was Darren so desperate to get that insurance money? Rourke glanced up, his eyes bloodshot. He told me he'd been seeing someone else. Said the diner was a chain around his neck. And so was she. Said once Clara was gone, he could cash out and move to Florida with the other woman. Sarah felt her stomach twist. It wasn't just greed. It was betrayal layered on top of murder. The DA was ready to move forward with murder charges. But Sarah wanted to play it right. They had Darren in custody, but she knew he'd fight it every step of the way. That's when Luis came in, holding a file. You want to see this? Bank records showed Darren opened a joint account with his girlfriend 2 days before the fire and deposited $5,000 in cash the morning after. Sarah closed the folder, a hard glint in her eyes. Looks like he was already spending Clara's life. But just as they prepared to confront Darren with the new evidence, word came from a jail. He had made bail, and he was gone. The call came in just after dawn. McConnell. The voice on the line said, urgent and clipped. Darren Dupree posted bail at 3:14 a.m. He's not at his listed address, and his phone's off. We think he's running. Sarah swore under her breath and swung her feet out of bed. Put out a bolo on him statewide. Check every bus station, train depot, and rental car desk. I want his picture on every cop's desk in Louisiana before lunch. She hung up and sat at the edge of the bed for a moment, the weight of it hitting her. She had watched too many cases unravel because a suspect slipped away before trial. Darren had motive, a co-conspirator's confession, and a trail of evidence. But none of it mattered if he wasn't sitting in front of a jury. By mid-morning, Sarah and Luis were in the squad room with a wall-sized map of Louisiana. Red pins marked the places Darren had been spotted or had connections. Lafayette, Baton Rouge, a fishing cabin in Homa, and, thanks to Rourke's statement, an address in Pensacola, Florida, where Darren's alleged girlfriend lived. 2 choices, Louise said, tapping the map. He runs east of her, or he disappears into the swamps down south where nobody will find him. Sarah shook her head. He's cocky. He thinks he's smarter than us. That means he'll try to get to her, but not in a straight line. He'll take back roads, avoid cameras, maybe swap cars. Late that afternoon, they got their first real lead. A state trooper in Morgan City reported pulling over a sedan with tinted windows for a broken taillight. The driver matched Darren's description but handed over a fake ID and sped off before the trooper could confirm it. The car was later found abandoned near a marina. On the dock, an old fisherman told them he'd seen a man matching Darren's description pay cash to rent a small boat. Headed out toward the bayou, the man said, pointing at the maze of winding waterways. Louise muttered, "If he's got half a brain, he's heading somewhere nobody can track him, and that's a lot of places out there." Sarah studied the water. The marsh stretched for miles, full of hidden fishing shacks and old hunting camps. If Darren reached one of those, he could live off the grid for months. While deputies swept the bayou, Sarah turned her attention back to Rourke. In the interrogation room, she slid a bottle of water toward him. "Darren's on the run," she said. "If we don't catch him, your deal with the DA's worth nothing. You'll be the only one holding the bag." Rourke's jaw clenched. He's got a cousin with a camp near Cypremort Point. Old place, no electricity, just a fishing shack. He said if things went bad, he'd hole up there until it blew over. Sarah felt a jolt of adrenaline. Where exactly? By nightfall, Sarah and a tactical team were moving through the thick reeds near the point. The shack came into view, weatherwood, tin roof, a single lantern flickering inside. Louise whispered, "He's here." But just as they approached, the lantern went out. Then came the sound, the low, steady thump of an outboard motor starting up. Darren was making a run for it. Sarah broke into a sprint toward the dock, her flashlight cutting through the dark. She caught a glimpse of him. Hoodie pulled up, hands gripping the tiller as the boat lurched into the channel. "Darren, stop!" she shouted, her voice echoing across the water. For a split second, he looked back, and even in the dark, Sarah could see it, the same faint smile he'd worn the night Clara burned. Luis raised his radio. "We've got him in a skiff heading southeast. If he makes the main channel, we lose him." Somewhere in the distance, the deep hum of a larger patrol boat grew louder. But whether it would reach them in time was another matter entirely. Darren was vanishing into the night, and Sarah knew if they lost him here, they might never get him back. The patrol boat's engine roared louder, cutting across the dark water, but Darren's smaller skiff was already weaving to the narrow bayou channels, disappearing behind walls of cypress trees draped in Spanish moss. Sarah didn't hesitate. She leapt into a small John boat tied to the dock, Louise right behind her. The motor sputtered to life, and she gunned it hard enough that the bow slapped against the waves. "Left channel," Louise shouted over the noise. "He'll try to hug the bank to stay out of sight." The air was thick with the smell of brackish water and fuel. The only light came from Sarah's handheld spotlight as she swept the beam across the rippling surface. For a moment, nothing, just the eerie quiet of the swamp at night. Then, a faint wake cutting through the reeds. "There!" she barked, yanking the tiller to the left. The boat lurched and skidded in the water. They closed the gap, but Darren's boat darted suddenly into a narrow offshoot, barely wide enough for their own vessel. Sarah followed, branches clawing at her arms, water spraying in their faces. The channel ended in a dead-end lagoon surrounded by marsh. Darren's skiff bobbed against the bank, engine still running. He was halfway out of the boat, backpack slung over one shoulder, as if ready to disappear into the swamp on foot. "Police, don't move," Sarah shouted, her voice cutting the night. Darren froze for a heartbeat, then bolted. Sarah jumped out, water up to her thighs, and gave chase. The mud sucked at her boots with every step, slowing her down, but adrenaline kept her moving. Darren crashed through the reeds, glancing back once with that same infuriating smirk. Luis's voice boomed from somewhere behind. "Stop. You're surrounded." They weren't, not yet. But Darren didn't know that. Suddenly, Darren's foot caught on a submerged log, sending him sprawling forward. His backpack flew open, spilling its contents. Bundles of cash, a prepaid phone, and a crumpled manila envelope. Sarah lunged, tackling him before he could scramble up. He twisted violently, trying to reach something inside his waistband. "Gun!" Luis yelled. Sarah grabbed Darren's wrist and wrenched it back, the pistol slipping from his grip and splashing into the swamp. With one final push, she drove him face first into the mud, cuffing his hands behind his back. "You're done running," she said through gritted teeth. Back at the dock, deputies searched the backpack. The manila envelope was stuffed with documents, among them the original copy of the insurance policy, Darren's fake ID, and a handwritten letter to someone named Shannon. The letter was short but damning. "I'll be there soon. Once this blows over, we'll have the money to start fresh. No more diner. No more Louisiana." Sarah stared at it, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Darren hadn't just killed Clara for money. He'd done it to erase her completely from his life. By the time they hauled him back to Lafayette Parish, news of Darren's capture had spread. A small crowd gathered outside the station, some holding candles for Clara, others shouting curses at the man in cuffs. Darren kept his head down, but Sarah saw it. The twitch in his jaw, the flicker of unease in his eyes. For the first time, the mask of smug control had cracked. Still, Sarah knew the case wasn't over. They had the evidence, the confession from Rourke, the trail of Darren's flight. But now came the trial, and Darren's defense team would fight tooth and nail to twist the story. They had him in custody. But whether they could put him away for life, that was still a battle to come. The trial of State of Louisiana versus Darren Dupree began 6 months later in a packed Lafayette Parish courtroom. Every seat was taken. Some came to honor Clara's memory. Others came out of morbid curiosity. Darren entered wearing a crisp suit, his hair neatly combed. The smirk was back, faint but deliberate, like he wanted the jury to see him as a calm, wronged husband instead of the man who had locked his wife in a burning building. Sarah sat just behind the prosecution table, her case files neatly stacked. Across from her, Kevin Rourke sat with his own attorney, ready to testify as part of his plea agreement. The prosecution built the case piece by piece. They showed the jury the grainy gas station footage of Darren buying fuel at 1:32 a.m. They played the neighbor's statement about seeing him leave his house just minutes before the fire. Then came Rourke's testimony. His voice was low, steady. He said we'd meet at the diner after she closed. He had the back door rigged so it could be locked from outside. My job was to pour the gas and light it. He promised me $50,000 once the insurance paid out. Rourke's words landed heavily in the silent courtroom. Some jurors shifted uncomfortably. Others stared hard at Darren, who sat stone-faced, only his jaw tightening. The defense tried to paint Rourke as the sole culprit, claiming Darren had been home, asleep, and that Rourke had acted alone out of some grudge. But the cross-examination shredded that angle. Sarah watched as the prosecutor slid the crumpled manila envelope across the witness stand, the one from Darren's backpack, and read the letter to Shannon. The jurors leaned forward. "I'll be there soon. Once this blows over, we'll have the money to start fresh. No more diner. No more Louisiana." It was a nail in the coffin. After 2 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for just 6 hours. The foreman stood and read the verdict. On the charge of first-degree murder, we find the defendant, Darren Dupree, guilty. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Darren's smirk vanished, replaced by the pale, stunned look of a man who had finally run out of escapes. The judge sentenced him to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Outside the courthouse, Clara's friends and customers from the diner gathered, holding photos of her and sharing stories. Many had tears in their eyes. Sarah stood at the edge of the crowd, listening quietly. She felt the bittersweet weight of closure, the satisfaction of justice done, tempered by the knowledge that nothing could bring Clara back. Luis joined her, hands in his pockets. "We got him," he said simply. Sarah nodded. "Yeah, But I wish we could have gotten here before she ever had to die." They stood there a while longer, watching the crowd. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang, a reminder that life in Lafayette would keep going. The diner would never reopen, but Clara's name would live on in the stories people told about her. And Darren Dupree would spend the rest of his life remembering the night he thought he'd gotten away with murder, until the law caught up to him in the dark, tangled waters of the Louisiana bayou.